Welcome to Stand Up for Doctors. I'm your host, Kim Downey. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to welcome Dr. Martha Kenney and Susan Hart. Thanks for joining us today, Martha and Susan.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. I'm really excited for our conversation. And so I met each of you on LinkedIn. And by way of introduction, Martha is an NIH-funded physician scientist and sickle cell pain researcher, and she also helps women in medicine build successful and thriving careers that are authentic to who they are, and that's fantastic and very important. And Susan reached out to me just this January, and I thanked you and I said, we have so many mutual connections. How do we not know each other already? I think we have like
exactly
609 mutual connections.
But who's counting?
Exactly. And Susan helps driven, smart people set healthy boundaries so they can experience joy and peace wherever they are. And I love that too. That's like so important. And today we'll be talking about, you've each had some significantly challenging life experiences and how they led you to coaching and the ways they've informed what's become your coaching niche. Because when we share our stories and, and how you've overcome adversity, that just helps everyone. So Martha, we could start with you. What would you most like our audience to know about you as we begin our conversation?
Great. I think for me, the important thing is that no matter what your story is, if you're willing to embrace that story, the good and the bad and the all in between, I think that you can actually make something out of it and really something that can really, truly transform you. So one of the first things that I have learned to do when I got a coach very early on in my journey was really embracing all the aspects of my story and allowing myself to be vulnerable and lean into some of the discomfort. And it brought out strength as a result.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And how about yourself, Susan?
Oh, I really, that's so great, Martha. It's put so well. In terms of my own story of adversity, the topic of today, I really thought about that, and I thought, I wonder how much that actually matters. It does matter in coaching. I think most important is how we use our story. So, it's a part of who we are, and I agree 100% with Martha that first and foremost, we have to integrate all the parts of ourselves in order to be fully available to coaching. But I don't think my experience with adversity qualifies me as a coach. It's simply, in my case, and I'm sure in Martha's as well, it gives me a lot more compassion and a lot more space to see all the possibilities, because not just my adversity, but of course, first and foremost, how I healed, how I triumphed, how I was humbled, all of that comes into the space, even if I never ever tell my story, because it's not always my place to tell my story. It just helps me see wider.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Martha, what would you like to share about your story?
Oh, wow. That might take up this entire episode. But I think, just the important pieces of my story is really, I am somebody who's always been incredibly ambitious. I came from a background where I had very little and faced a lot of financial adversity. And the likelihood of me actually even being a physician was very low because I had no physicians in my family. I'm a first generation college grad. And so all of those things. And so I became extremely ambitious, and I'm a go-getter. I put everything into whatever I do. And I think that's true for a lot of physicians. I think that all of us, medical school attracts super ambitious people. But in some way, medical school leads to this process where it really kind of decolonizes your identity and replaces it with something else. And so you leave. I went into the whole process, medical school residency and fellowship, as Martha, and all of the facets of my personality, all of the stories that I carry with me. And I left just as a physician, and my whole identity, my whole being was being a physician. And it's like Martha became a very tiny facet of that identity. And so as a result of that, I entered my first job really broken, with very little confidence, lacking clarity on what I wanted, and really seeking to please the people around me and please the system, rather than really pursuing what my dreams and what my passions were. And so it was through that first year, I'm grateful a friend of mine recommended getting a coach, and having a coach really helped me find my inner voice again and really find who I am, that Martha I am. And I really began to see that being a physician is it's a label. It's one part of my identity. It's funny. I gave a leadership talk to a group of women recently. And at the table I sat at, they didn't realize I was the keynote speaker, nor did they realize I was a doctor. And so when it came out as a doctor later on, they said, why didn't you tell us? And I said, but you're not my patient, and I'm not here as a doctor. I am here as a coach. And, if we are interacting in the clinical setting, I will introduce myself as Dr. Kenney, and you will see that side of my identity. But right now, there's other aspects of my identity that I wanted to share with all of you. And that's the reason why I'm pulled in here. And so it's almost irrelevant that I have that DR in front of my name. And so I'm in a great place, because that identity that was colonized by the system now has been, removed, and it's been deconstructed and rebuilt again into something that is much stronger, multifaceted, and able to actually be vulnerable and also share my story with other people as well.
I love that. Susan, would you like to respond to Martha at all before we hear more about the story?
Yeah, I was going to say that's the best possible outcome of coaching, what you're describing. That, especially physicians are so identified with that MD or DO or DR, that they don't know who they are. And that inevitably leads to a crisis of some kind, sometimes not until they're ready to retire, which is tragic. And so, and even coaching non-doctors, that's the goal, right? Is to help people realize all the parts of themselves, and to not lead with, I'm Dr. So-and-so. And I actually coach a physician, and he comes to mind right away, because through the coaching process, he said, I used to be, I am Dr. So-and-so. And now he leads with his name, and he says, and I happen to be a doctor. That's a piece of it. So that's really interesting. And then for me, you were asking,
basically, what would you like to share about your story?
Yeah. That's also, like Martha said, whoa. I mean, in terms of what brought me here, or are you meaning more the adversity?
Yeah, more the adversity, like some of the struggles that you've had that kind of led you to see coaching.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's just a product of being alive and a human. So I don't necessarily think my stuff is worse or it's different for sure. I've certainly had some privileges and some doors opening, and I don't take that for granted. But I was the child of a woman with mental illness. She just passed actually, but she also had Alzheimer's. I have a brother who has severe cognitive dysfunction. I had a kid who was very severely addicted to drugs. All of these things, those are the big ones. I've been assaulted when I was younger. I was a martial artist. I have so many facets. But I would say that having a child who was ill, and having a parent who is ill, and a brother, all of those things have just been such gifts. I know that sounds strange, but each and every one of them, in terms of building my capacity to understand such complexity, and to really be with it, to be in the room with, um, I don't want to say in my mom's case was silence. I would say in the last few years before she passed, being with her nonverbal self was such a great teacher for coaching. I don't think I ever became more comfortable in really being with clients in their silence, letting them find things in themselves because of my mother, just sitting there with her and having to find peace in the silence and not know what was going on in her head. And you know, that's one story. Another is really learning to let go of my son, which, you know, we're not hardwired to let go of our offspring, but to really turn him over, as they say in AA and Al-Anon, to the care of God, and that I wasn't God. And so, you know, really all of these experiences have humbled me, deepened me, given me great capacity to listen and be with. And I think that may be one of the things clients say to me is they're surprised. They don't feel judged. And I think, oh, well, of course not. But that's because I probably or may have been in their shoes, actually. Like who am I to judge? And I love the surprises. I love that, you know, I don't know Martha. I'm getting to know you, Kim. But how fun to sit down and have that great mystery of a new person unfold. And that's what I get to do. And I think, you know, my hardships, if you will, have mostly just been great gifts because I found a way through, and I can share more than anything my experience, strength, and hope with people. It's not about advice, but it's about feeling, you know, just that I get it and that I can hold this big, wide space for what's happening with people. And that is a really important way to create safe and courageous space for people to look at themselves. So.
Yeah, absolutely. What does that bring up for you, Martha?
I mean, as I was hearing you talk, I just kept hearing saying in my head that we're all human, right? And I love that you opened up with just talking about, you know, well, my story is about being human. And I think that as simple as that is, that gets lost on a lot of us, whether in your medicine or even outside of medicine. The culture that we live in asks you to be superhuman, asks you to not embrace your limitations, the limitations we have that are inherently human, like your needs for sleep, your need for, you know, a sense of belonging and connection with other human beings, right? Your need for like self-care, your need to be loved and accepted for who you are. All of those things are human needs, but we make it seem like when you need to sleep, when you're feeling lonely and you really need that connection, there's something wrong with you. That rather than you're just human. And so
you're human.
Yes. And so I think, especially in medicine, we need to embrace our humanity, not as weaknesses and not as limitations, but just as being human. And part of the problem with the whole burnout dialogue is the fact that we make burnout seem like it's an exception. It's a small few group of physicians who just aren't cut out for this cutthroat system that demands so much of you emotionally and physically, rather than the problem with burnout is that we're asking people to do what human beings cannot do.
Right.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Susan.
Oh, I was just going to say that is something that is unique to doctors. I think is that this idea, well, it's the culture, but the culture takes characteristics of perfectionism. You know, it starts maybe as ambition, but it becomes ambition and overdrive because the system takes full advantage of that. And so it's like, you know, people's tendencies that make them a good physician are the very things that also lead to burnout in a very unhealthy system. And so that's what was coming up for me. And I hear a lot in my coaching space, it's weak. I feel weak. It's like, and it's men and women. It's this ultra macho thing that any sort of emotion, need to sleep, all of it is weak. And so I think that's also such a huge risk because they feel so ashamed of that weakness, they go into hiding. And so nobody knows. That's why I think one of the reasons there's such high rates of depression and suicide, because they can't find a way to appropriately express, hey, I'm human, I need help, more than in other professions. Even though I deal with a lot of high achievers, I am myself one. I'm very driven and ambitious and all of that, but there is something about medicine that really takes full advantage of those and contorts it into things of burnout and worse,
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off what you said, Susan, and I completely agree. It takes advantage of that, personality type that tends to come into medicine. The system is set up, for people who are professionalists, people who can't say no, people who want to go above and beyond, the requirements. And, I coach primarily women who are in the early stages of their career. And I coach around work-life balance and time management. And I hear over and over again, like literally, it doesn't matter what institution, what their background is, the same thing. And when we talk about why they can't say no, well, then they'll think I'm weak. Then they'll never ask me to do anything again. Then I'll feel like I failed. It's that same repeated narrative, regardless of who the person is. And the system feeds into that narrative and it takes advantage of it. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Susan.
And women, I mean, what you're talking about, focusing on women, I think there's, you could speak to this better, but this a double part, and then, I mean, anyone of color. I also work with people of color. So if you have those things stacked up, I don't need to tell you, it's like, I can't say no ever because I have to be 50 times better than everybody else, or I will be stereotyped and pigeonholed.
Yes. Or they'll never, a repeating theme I hear. And I used to think this way too, from women of color, is that, well, if I say no, then I'm closing the door to another woman of color because I'm the first one in this position. And so they'll think that, like, next time they shouldn't put a woman of color in that position.
And a mom on top of it, right? All of those layers.
Yes.
So I'm just so impressed. I have so much admiration and respect for you. Everything, right, that you've done, because you've even immigrated here, right? Even that layer, right? So that's many, many layers of challenges, and look at you thriving. Go you.
and stereotyping. I mean, all of those layers. It's not, that's part of what I'm sure you've had to push through. Not just that, as you started at the beginning, not just because there weren't role models or doctors in the family, etc., but so many more. Like you said, being the first, like, well, I now have to somehow represent everybody else. Like, what a burden.
Yeah, it's a huge one.
Good thing you got coaching.
Oh, I mean, I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
And, it's like, it's been 7 years. I still have a coach, not the same one, but I rarely go a long period without having a coach, even though I am a coach. You just need it. I feel like it's so helpful. Yeah.
So that's awesome that you found it even before the pandemic.
Yes, I started, my first coach was in 2018 was my first coach.
So that's awesome because it wasn't as common, it wasn't as well known back then. So tell us how you found coaching?
Sure. I mean, it was through a friend. So one of my high school, I think one of the things that I have been intentional about is maintaining friendships with my non-physician friends, because they give me perspective on life. And they also helped me to tap into the other aspects of my identity. So I had a friend who is a coach, an executive coach for the federal government, doing things around communication and conflict resolution. And so I shared, some of my experiences with her, and she was like, "You need a coach." And I was like, "What? What is that?" I'm like, "I don't need a coach. I'm not like a leader, I'm not an executive." And she's like, "No, that's not." Now, you need a coach. This is what a coach can provide for you. So she helped me find my first coach. And so that was really, really an important experience for me. Yeah.
Well, that made all the difference. Susan, did you want to share how you came to coaching, to receive coaching?
Yeah, I came to coaching around 2018 also, pre-pandemic. And it was really an intuitive hit. I was working with, I had always interested in therapy. I didn't really know about life coaching. And when I did hear the phrase, I thought it sounded like, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say it, but I thought, oh, it's sort of like therapy light or something, like, what is that really? And I was teaching a movement modality, a very nuanced, subtle movement modality called gyrotonic. And I was helping people, I realized, really connect to their own bodies, themselves, what was possible in it, starting with their body. And I realized that's why people were coming back week after week. And I was like, what else can I do to help people really connect? And I just Googled, what is life coaching? And CTI popped up, which is the organization I'm certified with. And I was like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. It's not to be a therapist, it's life coaching. And I love the idea that it was so focused on what's here now and where you want to go. It was very much about action. It doesn't mean the past is out, but it's not a given that we sit there and turn that over. It's fuel for, how you see the world and what's coming. So it's like envisioning the future to empower where you are now. All of that is just so intriguing and exciting, and I think it's what I was naturally, I already tended to that. And so in the program is where I began getting my own coaching. And like you, Martha, I will never not have a coach. I talk to him here and there, but I just continue to immerse myself in the coaching world, because getting in here, this is this is a dangerous neighborhood to go in by ourselves, and having a coach to really look at things is so important, because we can make up stories. I don't care how evolved and self-aware we are. So that's been my journey.
Right. And then sometimes it's still hard to do it for yourself, right? Even when you're have had a coach training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I know how to ask myself coach-like questions, and I journal a lot, but sometimes you still really need to talk to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two components to self-awareness, right? There's internal self-awareness and external self-awareness. And so I think that even as a coach, we're probably really great at the internal aspect of it.
Yes.
But as the external, that I think even when you are a coach, being coach really helps you to, see the perspectives of you that are not you yourself. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So I feel like more and more people are talking about it, and that's some of the reason I have this channel, right, is to just share all these perspectives and all these stories. Do you both think that it is making a difference, in that there are more coaches and more people talking about coaches, and more people are learning about it and receptive to it? Do you feel like it's heading in that direction?
No, I mean, Susan can share her perspective too, but I think it is. I mean, there's, more emergent evidence also. I'm a researcher, so I always look for what's the evidence for this, not just, client testimonials, but is there like actual, studies, well-designed studies that have looked at coaching interventions. And there's a lot of studies now that are coming out, even with physician coaching, that looks at interventions, looks at burnout, decreases in burnout, increase in feelings, resilience, confidence, all of those factors. So definitely there's evidence that supports coaching. And there are more and more coaches now. The only stickler I have with coaching is that I think in the world of social media, you got to be careful, because there are people who may coach in their job roles, but they don't necessarily have formal training as a coach. And I'm a believer in formal training, because there's evidence in how to coach. Every single institute and organization has their own variation of it, but there is a governing body, which is the ICF for these organizations, right?
Yes.
And there's evidence, and there's a science, and there's ethics to it. And so I think that if you're going to call yourself a coach or work with someone who is a coach, make sure they are certified and make sure they've gone through that training, because I think that is important to make sure that it's being done professionally, ethically, and effectively as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And while there is a proliferation of the word coach, I think it makes it very hard for clients to wade through what is life coaching, and what does it mean to be certified. And you hit it on the head, Martha. It's there are ethics to it. I took the PCC ICF test, and ICF is International Coach Federation, and it was all about ethics. 81 questions on different situations that a coach could find themselves in, and what's the best answer and what's the worst answer. And this is really important, because there is so much nuance. And I do think that it's hard for people to wade through. And I'm just so glad to hear you say that, Martha, because I think, the thing about physician coaches versus other coaches is sometimes physicians can say, I'm a physician, therefore I'm qualified to coach other physicians. And that is not the qualifier, because it's not a support group. And, it's very, very different. So I am very happy to hear you call that out, because it does matter if you're an MD. Sure, that's an added thing. But to be a qualified coach is essential. And I guess that's what I was talking about a little earlier, is that it's not your life experience or your profession that qualifies you to be a coach. It's how you integrate all of that into your being, and your training. Your training as a professional coach. Very important.
Yeah, well, I agree with all of that. I have a coach myself, and you both know him, Dr. Michael Hirsch.
Yeah.
And he's awesome, and both of you are awesome. And, Susan and I have had a couple conversations, and I was just reading your blog post this morning, and that was so excellent. And it brought a couple things to mind. You talked about Mary Oliver, and I have this book, but I haven't had time to read it. And then people are going to want to check out your blog, because then you were talking about the red boots, and I've got myself a pair of
Nice.
red boots. I was like showing.
Excellent.
And then, and Martha, I follow her posts on LinkedIn, and they're just, they're just always
Really
so on
good.
point, and I feel like I learn something every day. So as we're starting to wind down, Martha, is there anything else you want people to know about you or your coaching style?
Sure. So there's different coaching styles. I trained with an organization that does solution-focused coaching. And so, and I think that's true to all coaching, right? It's back to what Susan said. Doesn't matter what happened in the past. My goal is to help you get clarity on what you want to happen in the future, where you want to be, and help you close the gap. And that is really the focus of my coaching. And as I mentioned, I coach primarily early career women in medicine, particularly academic medicine, because I feel like that's a whole nother beast. And I could talk about that when you're in academia, you have like 2.5 jobs. And so
Yeah.
and the culture is very different as well. So my focus is in coaching women in that space. I do have like a career guide that I've created for women in academia. If you link with me on LinkedIn, you'll find that career guide. And as of this summer, I'll be launching a group coaching program for women in academia as well. So I'm excited about that also.
Excellent.
That's very exciting. Susan, what else would you like everyone to know about you and or your coaching style?
My coaching style is, very much about deep listening, asking powerful questions, intruding when necessary with intuitive hits. I can be very intuitive. And I would say, just being super open to solutions that neither of us had in mind. That's like the best part, where you're like, I did not see that coming. But they own it. And I see miracles every day in the coaching space. So I'm just a huge believer in coaching. I've experienced it myself. I've seen it with my clients. And so it's just an incredibly meaningful way to spend my days. And then I'm also writing a book called Prioritizing Your Self-Care. And it is part memoir and part workbook, kind of taking stories like the one you're referencing, Kim, and then sort of blowing it out to what I learned and then turning it on the reader, when have you, or, what, helping people sort of dig in using my story as hopefully an inspiration.
Well, I love that. And you've both helped me in your own ways. Susan, you and I have had a couple conversations and they weren't specifically coaching, but I went away, really learning some things and acting on some things. And like I said, Martha's post, it just gets me thinking every single day. And
Nice.
so I was so happy to introduce you to each other and to introduce.
I'm glad to meet you.
People that don't, that didn't already, weren't fortunate enough to know you yet. Now they will. And so how can our listeners get in touch with you, Martha?
LinkedIn is the best place. You'll find me at least 5 days a week on LinkedIn, if not more than that. So that is the best place to find me. That's my social media platform of preference. But if you're not a LinkedIn person, you can also send me an email at Dr. Kenney, KENNEY, @timematterstoday.com. Okay,
that sounds great. And how about you, Susan?
Probably through my website, which is www.wildheart.coaching.com. And that's where people can find my blog and can also contact me there and set up coaching. I love offering complimentary coaching calls just to see if it's a fit, and so they can get a feel for how I am, how I show up.
Okay, well, that's fantastic. Well, thank you both again for being my guests. I knew I would love our conversation, and I did. And I can't wait to share it.
Well, it was great. Great to meet you, Martha. You're a real inspiration. I can tell that your clients benefit a lot from you, and I hope we can talk in another space another time.
Yeah, I would love to stay connected with you, Susan. It's a pleasure hearing from you. I can hear that you're just a wealth of experience. So someone like me definitely can learn from you. And thank you so much too, Kim, for having us. Yeah.
Kim, thank you. You're just really, truly a connector. So thank you for connecting us.
You're very welcome. And somehow the matches always seem to work out very well. So I think someone's guiding me. I don't know who, but someone's guiding me. So in closing, to move the needle in healthcare, we all need to raise our voices and we all need to care about each other. We already know that doctors need to care about patients. Patients need to care about doctors too. So stand up, doctors, and let's stand up for doctors.
All right. Thank you.